Good morning, afternoon, and evening to our esteemed panelists and our audience around the world. On behalf of Business Call to Action, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session that convenes representatives from the public and the private sector to discuss the role of government in advancing inclusive innovation and to explore how inclusive business can develop B2G models to generate impact at scale. As we have seen, the innovations that shake up industries are those that are fundamentally reimagining how to create, deliver, and capture value. For decades, breakthrough innovations have leveraged new technologies and business models to drive down costs, to increase accessibility, and improve services. These processes have remained mostly in private sector territory, and fortunately, we see this trend changing. The scope and urgency of impacts of COVID-19 have provided new conditions for governments to claim leadership on innovation and set its direction to solve challenges facing society and to change markets, rather than limiting themselves to fixing market failures. However, the World Bank notes that innovation presents a particular challenge for developing country governments, facing weak firm capabilities to adopt new technologies, weak enabling environments, and limited government capabilities to implement and support policies. So on the top of this, governments are also experiencing severe budget constraints with cumulative loss on global GDP that's estimated around $9 trillion. So in response to this, Business Call to Action is supporting governments to deploy these proven solutions through inclusive innovation processes in collaboration with impact-driven enterprises, thereby serving increasingly poor populations in shrinking fiscal space, while mitigating the risk inherent in innovation processes. So BCtA Inclusive Innovation Journey facilitates the replication and adaptation of global innovation, seeding the ecosystem of local entrepreneurs with inclusive models. So inclusive innovation is mostly at the core of Building Back Better, and we understand that this is quite an important role that governments have to play in collaboration with enterprises and with the private sector as a whole. So mostly to expand and sustain delivery of essential services while addressing pre-existing and emerging development gaps. So now let's kick off our session where we will learn about the best practices in government-led innovation processes implemented by the public sector, a development bank, a woman entrepreneur, who have embraced this challenge in a very interesting way, and they are also implementing these solutions in very different contexts. So you can learn from their knowledge and experience through this panel. So based on this, I'd like to invite our guests to briefly introduce themselves and to present their experience on leading innovation processes before opening the first round of questions. We encourage our audience to send questions and messages in the chat. At the end, we'll try to cover and at least answer to all of them. So our first panelist today is Koos Zenting. He's the program manager at Impact City, The Hague. Koos, over to you. We're pleased to listen about your experience in The Hague.
Thank you, Luciana, and it's a pleasure to be with you all, international guests. Yes, my name is Koos Zenting, and I'm the program manager of Impact City. Impact City is a leading impact ecosystem in the city of The Hague. For you who don't know The Hague is really an international city. We have a lot of UN organizations. So we call ourselves also the City of Peace and Justice. But 6 years ago, we saw that there was, we have a lot of NGOs, large companies, but there was a lack of startups. And they are really important in terms of bringing new innovations to the market. So therefore, we founded the Impact City program. And within 6 years, we have seen a tremendous increase in the amount of impact startups in The Hague. So we provide them with a lot of support and that can be with helping them with raising capital. We help them with housing, office space, affordable office space, events. We have a big Impact Fest, it's called. It's on November 4. But also an important area is, of course, is our Startup in Residence program. And this is a program where we as a city of The Hague, we as a city have many challenges, and we ask startups to solve those challenges. It always has to be an innovation element in the challenge. It also helps to open up the procurement of the city. We have, as a city, we have a budget of 1 billion we do with procurement, but we saw that most of these assignments, they will go to the big companies, the usual suspects. So we wanted to open that for startup companies. And it has been really successful. We actually do it now not only with the city of The Hague, but also with the national government and the regional government. So we have even built a bigger program. So that's really the best practice I wanted to share with you in terms of a program where you can really start innovating from the public sector with the private sector.
Great. Thank you, Cus. I'll now hand over to Francisco Nogueira, President at Impulsa in Colombia. Welcome, Francisco.
Thank you, Luciana. Thank you so much. And thank you for this invitation. I lead Impulsa. Impulsa is the national agency in the government of Colombia leading the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem. Our goal is to establish Colombia as a regional hub, as a regional leader in terms of the enabling environment for startups, for innovation, for an economy that is driven by entrepreneurship and innovation. And two of our current priorities are very much aligned with the goals of building back better and aligning the entrepreneurship and innovation agenda with the sustainable development goals and with the 2030 agenda. We work in 3 levels. We work directly with startups in various stages of maturity. We also work in strengthening a national ecosystem and trying to align the work of various entities, incubators, accelerators, academia, funds, to really work together in a more coordinated way. And we establish an enabling environment that includes policy, talent, basic infrastructure for entrepreneurship to flourish in Colombia. Related to the dialogue that brings us together today, I want to highlight 2 goals and 2 priorities that we're working on right now. One is strengthening the impact ecosystem in Colombia, that is bringing together a growing number of funds, impact enterprises, and also entities that are working towards sustainable development goals to really strengthen and establish Colombia as an entrepreneurship ecosystem that is aligned with impact principles. And the second one is the public innovation agenda, which we'll discuss later on today. But that really is creating a space where startups and the startup community can collaborate with the government in addressing public innovation challenges. The government is really facing a lot of challenges related to digital transformation, to becoming more agile and more efficient in delivering a lot of its services. And we believe that startups and the entrepreneurship ecosystem has a lot to offer. And we've created a space called the Public Innovation Lab to enable that collaboration between the startup community and government. So those are 2 areas that we can discuss and that I wanted to highlight. And thanking you again for the opportunity to join you this morning.
Thank you, Francisco. I'll hand over now to our third panelist, is Ms. Rupali Mehra. Rupali is the co-founder of MyTransform, that is a BCtA member company. Rupali, over to you. Rupali, Can you, your phone is off. Your microphone
Okay.
is off.
Hi, I'm sorry. Hi. So I greeted everyone. So I'll greet once again. So hello, Luciana, once again. And it's nice to hear Cruz and Francisco as well. There's some awesome work happening in this field. And entrepreneurs like us can only be happy that there's so much work happening, and organizations like Impulsa and Impact City are doing such wonderful work. It's important that there is support in this ecosystem, and that only adds to the power and will of the entrepreneur to deliver. So so starting off with my introductory note, absolutely privileged to be a part of the event. As we all emerge from the long shadow of the pandemic, I think the theme of the event today, inclusive business at the nexus of recovery, becomes absolutely relevant. I think it's a great initiative, and congratulations, Luciana. I think my compliments to you and your team for such a well-organized event. I absolutely relate to you. There was so much planning and so many training sessions and detailing prior to the event, and I'm sure it's really going to go very well. So I'd like to greet everyone in attendance as well, and begin by briefly describing our work. Transform operates in the space of career education and skills development through a B2G model. We bring students, educators, and governments on a common platform. Our solution enables students to make informed choices, and it enables governments to take youth-centered decisions in education, skilling, and employment. In context of this event in particular, we'd also like to share our learning of this space and how we think other people should maybe slightly change their perspective of this space in view of the experience that we've had. Having worked with multiple governments, we've really had some good insights. Like all other businesses, there are challenges, no doubt, but we've come to realize that for businesses that intend to solve significant social problems, the B2G model is probably the best way forward. And why I say that? Because innovative businesses like us, who believe in creating social value alongside business value, must reach beneficiaries at all levels of the pyramid. And B2G partnership enables exactly that. Now let's also look at the government side of it. In the last few years, we've had some wonderful interactions with the government, not just with the leadership, but also with officials, where they absolutely were clear that they were enthusiastic about bringing the change. They demonstrated willingness to adopt innovations from the private sector. So to all our audiences here, from businesses and from government, I would like to say that successful B2G partnerships are a definite way to move forward, particularly for impact-oriented inclusive businesses, and for governments that seek to bring change with new and groundbreaking ideas. Not only the outcomes of such engagement are mutually rewarding, but I believe, and I strongly believe, that this space is quite likely to bring out the most inspiring and game-changing impact stories in the times to come. I look forward to the views of other panelists in the session, and that's it from my side.
Thank you very much, Rupali. It's very interesting to hear the perspective from an entrepreneur and from the private sector in this dialogue, particularly after listening to the experiences that Cruz and Francisco brought in terms of the drivers that are leading government to really be open to new possibilities to innovate with the private sector. So now I'll hand over to Jorge Abash, Vice President for Private Sector at the Development Bank of Latin America, CAF. Jorge, we'll be pleased to hear from you in your experience in Latin America. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Luciana, for having me on this very interesting panel. Hello to everybody, to my panel colleagues. I am, as Luciana just mentioned, Vice President for Private Sector at the Development Bank of Latin America. We operate in the entire Latin America, plus Spain and Portugal. We look at government and private sector problems and try to support them with financial and non-financial support. And also, we have a very big agenda that looks for solutions coming from the startups, the capital markets, and other areas where we can provide and support new solutions. I think that one key aspect related to this discussion is the structural changes that we have been seeing over the last years and probably over the coming years. As you all know, we have the pandemics, but we also have all the agenda related to climate change. We have the agenda related to SDGs, and we have very big changes on technologies that are in a way or another challenging, especially developing economies and small and middle-sized companies in developing economies. All those changes come with important aspects. One of them is related to risks. Operating in the private sector or try to solve some of the problems that I have just mentioned is not as easy as before. Not only because of the changes, but because many of those areas come with externalities, come with spillovers, and require, in many cases, collective actions for us to look for solutions that really stands up and help solve the problems. This is not an easy agenda that requires governments and the private sector to work together in order to provide and to develop the right solutions that help address all those problems. In our case, we work with startups. We have been working very hard with the governments providing new solutions related to e-government technologies. We have been supporting startups that are providing and developing new solutions for the pandemics and for climate change. So I expect to have a nice discussion with you related to these topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie. It's very interesting to hear your perspective, particularly from Development Bank, and how you can support these initiatives, and you are supporting initiatives in Latin America. So we have very interesting experiences being presented here today, as you can see. Now we will open to our first round of questions. I will address my first question to Koos. Koos, building on your experience in setting up the Startup in Residence program in The Hague, in your opinion, what are the current challenges to incubate private sector solutions that would be taken over by governments?
Yes, so I still think, for people from the government, it's not easy to adopt solutions from startups because they are not. We are more used to go with the usual suspects, like the bigger corporates with the reputations. So the innovative companies, it's definitely in terms of reputation that remains a challenge. And also sometimes in the procurement rules, at least here in Europe, it is challenging to work with with these kind of companies. So we have, and also, of course, these are also more risky companies in a way, because they are smaller. If the founders, become ill, then there are more risk also in terms of if you hire such a company. On the other hand, it helps so much for the government to become more innovative themselves if they work with new types of solutions, new innovations they never have seen before. A big challenge for us remains we want they get a first assignment, so a small assignment. And of course, the whole goal of this program is that they will have a bigger assignment after the Startup in Residence program. So they really stay in residence in our program. So they are a couple of months really part of the government as an entrepreneur. But you also hope that they will have a bigger assignment also from other governments, but also from the city of The Hague after this period. That's really the goal. And we have seen a couple of success cases. But of course, I'm ambitious and I want to see more of those we don't, you can say we don't have a lot of budget and we always face budget cost, but on the other hand, if you see the amount of procurement budgets governments have, there is a lot of money we could spend more innovative, but also sometimes more on companies that bring forward social solutions. So I think there's a big role, still big room for improvement also on the side of governments to work with innovative and also social solutions.
Thank you, Koos. Interesting to see that the incubation process, in fact, is also a way of mitigating the risks that this partnership with small enterprises can bring to the table. So you've developed an interesting model in order to de-risk the process, and also a learning journey for the enterprises, as far as I can understand. So I'll hand over to Francisco. Francisco, for you, as president of a governmental agency for entrepreneurship and innovation in Colombia, what was the driver of Impulsa to integrate an e-gov lab such as MILAB, that is, by the way, partner of BCtA in an innovation process in Colombia, and we're very pleased with this. Can you provide, understand what's the type of support that is necessary, expertise and best practices that governments need to drive public innovation and support GovTech ecosystems?
Absolutely, Luciana. Happy to expand on MILAB, and happy to mention that the growth of MILAB has been possible thanks to incredible partnerships with BCtA, with CAF, who also have been incredible allies in terms of driving this agenda. But let me just give you a brief context of where we are as a nation and how this GovTech agenda fits very well with the current challenges and priorities that we are facing. First, Colombia established in its current National Development Plan as a top priority digital transformation of various levels of society and of government in particular. That digital transformation agenda includes a wide array of policy measures in various sectors, and that is accompanied by a dynamic that we've been seeing in the last years related to private sector development and startup ecosystem development. We've seen incredible growth in terms of private capital seeking technology-based startups and technology-based solutions to various challenges in various sectors of the economy. So MILAB is really a project that brings together those two pieces of context, those digital transformation challenges faced by various government entities at the national level, but also at the local, regional, municipal level, and the growing capacity of the startup ecosystem to deliver solutions. And what we are doing through MILAB really has basically two levels of action. One, supporting government entities in the identification of challenges that can be presented to the startup community, challenges that can be then seen as an innovation challenge where startups can deliver and present their solutions and then facilitate that match between government agencies and those startups. In that sense, we are accompanying government entities in what it means to identify an innovation challenge, how can they present those challenges to the startup community, and also creating that language and that environment in which startups can become aware of these opportunities to engage with government. That is one level of activity. And then there is another one that has to do with strengthening and building the GovTech ecosystem as a whole. And that includes a lot of work that we are doing with the support of CAF and also BCtA. For example, in a few days, we'll be having the first GovTech forum to really bring together a lot of the thought leaders and entities that are working in this ecosystem, not only in Latin America, but around the world. We are, just recently, we closed a call for public entities and public servants around Colombia to learn about this GovTech ecosystem and really become familiar with the language and the tools and the vision for this GovTech ecosystem. And the response was overwhelming. We received a lot more applications than we were expecting in terms of, and that shows a lot of interest at the regional and at the national level and inside public entities in terms of becoming engaged and learning about this ecosystem and how this collaboration and this communication between startups and government entities can begin to, or can continue to deepen. And thirdly, we are structuring a financing mechanism. We think that GovTech startups need to be understood, and the GovTech vertical requires a deeper level of specialization in terms of the financing that these startups could need in order to continue their growth trajectory. So we are in the process of structuring a fund that could provide early stage financing to startups in this GovTech ecosystem. And lastly, continue to build knowledge, evidence that gives us a sense of whether we are moving in the
Francisco. I think Francisco has an internet connection problem. So I think that we can move on. Let's wait a little bit. Yes. So Francisco, as soon as you rejoin us, we have more questions to you. So I'm sure that we can continue this conversation. So now I'll ask a question to Rupali. Rupali, I'd like you to bring... Sorry, Francisco.
I'm back. Sorry,
Okay.
Something happened with my connection. I'm sorry, but I was just wrapping up and saying that all of this work we're making sure that we track and that we assign the right metrics and that we align with the regional and international rankings and indexes that have to do with the development of this GovTech ecosystem, and we are really enthusiastic about this long-term agenda related to GovTech and MILAB, with the partnerships and the support that we're receiving from CAF and BCtA and other local allies that are also critical. So thank you, Luciana. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Francisco. I'll hand over to Rupali. For you, I'd like you to bring your perspective on how can businesses design B2G models that expand and sustain the delivery of essential services. So like might transform delivers career, education, and skills development to the BOP students in rural areas in India. Can you tell us a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities that you're facing in developing these solutions in India on education?
Thanks, Luciana. Absolutely. And before I start to answer the question, I'd like to thank Koos for sharing his thoughts on how governments perceive startups as, of course, risky investments and partnerships. But yes, I'm sure Impact City is doing wonderful work, as Luciana said, in kind of, to some extent, addressing that risk. And also, thank you, Francisco, for talking about GovTech ecosystem. That was interesting. We being in tech space and working with government, that immediately, got my attention. And I think I'd love to speak to you about this, because you also did mention that it wasn't just an initiative, specific to a country, but it was rather global. So it'd be a pleasure to speak to you in detail on this, maybe, after the session. So I'll begin, answering the question that Luciana asked. So trying to kind of drawing mostly from our experience with the government, and I think that's what is expected. It will be important if we could really bring out some useful insights for not just the stakeholders here, but also for the audiences who are listening today. Our B2G model evolved over time, and we believe that's natural to expect for other businesses too. That said, here are some quick insights that may help in designing a successful B2G model, and what were the key aspects that helped us in particular when we evolved our B2G model, and today we call it a successful working B2G model. The first and foremost point that we understood, over a period of time, was important to create was political will. Government is the decision-making authority, and therefore political will is essential. But that said, I'm sure a lot of businesses would be hearing, be the audience today in this session. I would encourage the innovative businesses to believe that political will can be created. It's for the businesses to reach out to the governments to establish how the innovation can help governments in their areas of priority. When things like GovTech ecosystem and governments are getting digital, I mean, Francisco did also talk about governments getting digital, they would like to hear about these innovations. We have to be able to demonstrate as innovators the strength of our innovation in a manner that it leads to strong political will. It's important to create the political will not only at the initial stages, but also to sustain it going forward. And that can only happen once we demonstrate the results. Just a quick, setting a quick context on, how did we do it? So every time I kind of, share my experience, I would try to relate it to, what I'm saying in terms of designing this business model. So when we went out to the government and, with an intent to create a political will, so to say, we convinced the government that interventions to address youth employment must be aligned with the youth choices. Creating skill development or employment opportunities in the areas of youth interest would lead to higher enrollment and employability. Even employers would be keen to invest in a state if the talent is readily available. Not only that, the youth will, but the youth will also, have no reasons to move out of the state, not migrate. So that's really important point that I wanted to, drive here, that the people who are the decision makers, the governments, must understand the essence of the innovation, and they must be able to relate it to their strategic goals. It's important. The next point that I would like to make is the institutionalization of the program. To institutionalize a program, and that is to be able to incorporate the program formally into the government system, the first consideration must be the magnitude. We all would agree that government is a large and complex entity with many departments, divisions, and hierarchies, which are all intertwined. Now, this requires that our processes are well articulated, documented. Believe me, no amount of granularity is enough while dealing with such large entities. Process definitions must be clear, precise, with almost no room for subjective interpretation. That said, just doing the documentation isn't enough. It's only the half job done. The other half is to explain it to the key stakeholders and establish complete understanding. Only then there's a chance that it will be adopted seamlessly across the board. In our case, for instance, we created documentation related to program deliverables, roles and responsibilities, training and capacity building, monitoring, measurement, and even financial disbursement mechanisms are documented. Trust me, sustainability and scalability will depend hugely upon how well this institutional design functions. Now coming to the third point, we discussed political will, we discussed program institutionalization. The third point, which is the most important point, is of course the delivery. We'll all agree that delivering on one's promise of value creation is critical to any business. Every business naturally possesses a high level of expertise in their own areas, and hence this, of course, needs no discussion, in terms of how to do it. What must be mentioned briefly, though, is the replication and adaptation strategy that must be deployed during the program delivery. Adapting one's business to the local context is essential. While the fundamental idea and concepts underlying the innovation must be preserved, some required components must be adapted to the local conditions. Now, we talked of political will, institutionalization, program delivery. While all of them are critical to the success, and I'm sure you would all agree, it's important that government also plays an active role. That, I believe, is the most crucial part in success of any government-private partnership. That's really it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abash, for your inputs. It's quite interesting to hear your perspective and to see the different layers and challenges that you have in this collaboration with government. So that these solutions can be, in fact, effective and reach scale. So, Jorge, over to you. I'd like to hear from you as an expert of development finance and economics. How do you see the innovation process with your government? How are governments contributing to increase the competitive advantage of local industries? And how does inclusive innovation can contribute to Latin Americans' growth?
Thank you, Luciana. This is a quite interesting question. And just also to mention that I heard very interesting points mentioned by Cos, Francisco, and Rupali. I understand that, as I mentioned before, we are facing new times and new challenges. And these new challenges require not business as usual to tackle our development challenges, and something that Rupali mentioned, which is related to local context, territorial level. I think that governments have to assume that for them to do their work properly, they have to increase their menu of options and look for new solutions for new and for old problems. Although a lot of things have to be done, we have also to recognize that governments are doing some interesting things. Just to mention one of them, which is related to financial inclusion. As we all know, small and middle-sized companies and micro firms face a big hurdle to have access to financial markets. This is very, very much the case of Latin America, but also Africa and other parts of the world. So we need new solutions. We need new platforms, and that is happening already. In the case of financial access, some governments here in the region are working with things like sandbox and things like open innovation frameworks, or called open banking, that have created the right environment for startups and fintechs to take part in the financial market and to help include not only SMEs, but also people. And that is really working well. And that's to say that using the regulatory framework rights may be one good and potent option for governments to incentivize the private sector to help, especially in the context of new challenges such as those ones that we are facing. Another thing is related to something that is called mission-oriented innovation support. This is something that is somehow popular in Europe these days. It's not a new idea, but it has been used as a way to frame and to invite the private sector to put their a lot more emphasis on very specific instruments and solutions for very specific challenges. That is, I understand, especially important in a context of where the climate change will probably affect developing and developed countries as well. So having this type of framework is indeed a way to go. Another one is related to government procurement. As I mentioned before and mentioned by Rupali, government procurement is perhaps among all the instruments at the hand of the governments, it is probably the most potent instrument. So governments have to use this instrument right in order to incentivize not only the development of solutions, but also the development of new players to take part in those solutions. And one final remark is related to how governments and the private sector can work in order to help provide solutions. I give you as an example a program here in Latin America called Internet para Todos, or Internet for All. We have been working with Telefónica, which is a communication company from Spain. We have been working with Facebook and with the government of Peru and the IDB in order to provide internet access to rural areas in Peru. It has been working pretty well. And now we are working in Colombia, and we plan to do the same thing in other countries in the region. That's to say that there is room for governments and for the private sector to work together in order to provide these new solutions. I stop here.
Thank you, Jorge. We have so much to say and to discuss around this exciting subject. So I'll go back to Cruz. Cruz, can you tell us a little bit more? We know that you have contributed to setting up national investment schemes for business angels and venture capital. So can you tell us a little bit more from the perspective of public sector? What are how you have managed to direct innovation towards critical problems, for solving critical problems, particularly taking the perspective from The Hague and the Startup in Residence program?
Yes, I've done this for the national government of the Netherlands. So we have, I think it's in the whole of Europe. Actually, the public sector plays a big role, in particular in the venture capital industry. I also think it's in many other continents the case. Most of the time as a co-investor. So really the private sector decides which investments are made in which startups. But the public sector acts as a co-investor, which is really important to create those venture capital markets. And I think it's really interesting, but I have to say these are still purely financially driven investors. And what we see now is, of course, the rise of the impact investing landscape, which are investors that really care also about social impact. And I think there is even a bigger role, and I should advocate that we put more money in these kind of investors. And also Francisco was mentioning like the GovTech funds, and the mission-orientated businesses that make sense that we focus more on that kind of investors. And it's not easy because then you go into the area of impact measurements. You have to be really sure that the claims they make, the investors, that's really done, so that they really the impact measurement is really important. But I'm sure Rocalie also has also experience with that. But you have to demonstrate that there is social impact. But there is also like the whole philanthropy world, which is moving in this. So we see those worlds are moving more and more together, more the tech investors and the philanthropy in the impact investor scene. And I'm really positive that we can have a lot of money deployed to solve the biggest problems we face. If we really do that, if we bring the knowledge of the venture capital industry more in the philanthropy, I'm really positive about that. And I think we should do that so that it's not only about the financial returns, but really about also the social returns for society in those investors. And that's what I see, and that's why I also joined the Impact City program. I want to be part of that world. I have to say that.
So thank you, Cruz. An interesting insight in terms of the role of impact investors. Francisco, now over to you. I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about what are the current challenges to direct innovation towards solving critical problems faced by governments, particularly looking into the perspective of delivering services to low-income populations. Can you elaborate a little bit more about this? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely, Luciana. And I think that the remark that Jorge was making in his last answer has a lot to do with this. This conversation can be framed in terms of bold and big development missions that then can be supported, that then can be connected with the capabilities of the private sector, and in particular the startup and the entrepreneurial community. In Colombia, just to mention a few examples, one of the key development goals that we are pushing forth is energy transition. And energy transition has a manifestation, of course, in the delivery of energy at the last mile with communities that are not connected to the grid. That the provision of those services at that level, in that last mile phase, if you will, is directly connected to a mission that has been established by the government, a mission that will not be accomplished in 1 or 2 years, but that has a long-term horizon. And I think that setting those missions is critical in order to align the capabilities of all the actors, not only the government, but also the support of the private sector in various levels. That is one layer and one part of the answer. And the other one has to do with identifying what gaps can be filled and what areas, what regions of the country. In a country like Colombia, we have a lot of regions, and we call those municipalities. We classify some municipalities in terms of their social vulnerability, in terms of their how they were affected by the conflict in the last years, and creating special conditions where government funding can de-risk and invite the participation of entrepreneurs in the provision of some services, such as the example I just mentioned in energy or in education or in health or in any basic service. I think is critical, and that ties directly with this model of innovation labs that bring together the public and private sector. I'll keep it at that, just to be able to answer some of the questions that are coming in. But that idea of missions, and then identifying those areas where government can reduce the risk perception of the private sector are two critical ideas. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Francisco. Very interesting indeed. Rupali, over to you. I'd like to understand from the perspective of a government service provider that you are at your companies. What were the benefits of applying and participating in government-led initiatives, and what were your key challenges? If you can just synthesize this briefly. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. I think I'll be brief, absolutely. And before I start, I absolutely, am amazed at the idea of mission-specific innovation support. Jorge mentioned it, and Francisco also talked of it. And Koos talked about, impact to be measured along with the business value. And thank you so much, Koos. That's exactly the point that we keep driving home when we talk to investors, whenever. There has to be some synergy in terms of what is it that you're working towards. Now, in terms of now answering the question, Luciana, I would, probably not discuss in detail the first benefit, because I've already mentioned it in my opening remark, which was the impact. Businesses can only create impact, when they work with the governments, because it's only the governments which can give you the access to demonstrate your innovation at all levels of the pyramid. And that's what you need to reach masses. You need government to be able to create impact. And for inclusive business, of course, it's almost a necessity. One benefit that I'd like to talk about, slightly in detail, is that of scale. In addition to demonstrating value to the customers, it's also about the numbers, the scale. Typically, a business would have to convert 1 million customers to be able to sell 1 million pieces. But when you work with the governments instead, it's about having to deal with only one customer, the government. And with the scale comes another advantage, reduced cost. And trust me, for any innovator, the two biggest challenges after creation of the innovation and after testing of the innovation are to bring the cost down per unit and to take the innovation to the market. Now, cost per unit definitely comes down drastically with economies of scale. It enables our innovation to offer higher value for money in comparison to other service providers. If you look at sales and marketing, we've heard, the innovations going to investors, and 60 to 70% of that investment budget going into sales and marketing. If you save on that kind of money, all that investment could actually go into the enrichment of the product and services. Thirdly, the businesses which work with the government, they're able to test their bandwidth and capacity to deliver. You're not able to do that so easily, when you work with, customers that you're developing gradually. But when you work with businesses, they offer you such a huge scale that your bandwidth is immediately tested. We experienced that. I mean, there were situations where we literally had to, in real time, enhance our technological bandwidth, even manpower bandwidth, to meet the needs of the government. Quickly now coming to the challenges. So, in terms of the benefits, I talked of impact, scale, and of course, testing the bandwidth. In terms of challenges, only 2 points. One is, of course, the political instability. When we're looking at political will as such a strong driver of government partnership, political instability could be a huge risk. And just in case that happens, while the institutionalization of the process is still underway, it could be a huge challenge. It's very difficult to have the same kind of goals and strategies, when the governments are transitioning. I'm sure, people come with different mandates. The second one is, of course, the change management. We have to be very sensitive of the people that we're dealing with. They're not just customers, they're government employees. They aren't answerable to you. They won't come back to you if the solution doesn't work. You have to work with them closely so that they're able to use that innovation without having to feel the burden of it, that they have to do something new differently. You have to work with them very closely so that they feel the delight in using the new innovation to do the same job, maybe in a better way and more refined way. It should also make their lives easier. So that's really 2 challenges I think I wanted to mention, and that's it from my side.
Thank you, Rupali. I'll hand over to Jorge. Jorge, you have a unique combination of public and private sector expertise. What are the financial mechanisms that multilateral development banks are using to advance inclusive innovation to support both entrepreneurs and policymakers? Can you elaborate a little bit more about this? We've heard a little bit about impact investing. What are the other mechanisms that you are using at the bank? Over to you.
Thank you, Luciana. This is an important question. I think that one of our roles as a development bank, a regional development bank, but also other development banks, national and subnational development banks, is to identify great areas in markets and to help de-risk whatever is related to the needs and to the function of that specific market. This is one thing. The other thing is related to help developing markets, being capital markets or a specific market that is needed for a given a circumstance or a given context. That's what development banks are about. Now, we are there not to look at only the financial conditions related to our specific interventions, but to combine that with doing good. That's the main task, the main mission of banks like CAF. We deploy different instruments in accordance with the different circumstances. Of course, one of them is related to providing guarantees and other similar financial tools. Another one, that's just to give an example. Francisco is here with us. Francisco is in Colombia. We are working with Bancodex, which is a national development bank there, provided second type of guarantees for helping reduce the cost of Bancodex guarantees in the first instance. This is just one example. Another one is related to helping the private sector in issuing bonds. An example, we are helping a microfinance institution in issuing bonds in the market, and we assume part of the risk so that it reduces the cost for them to be in the market and for issuing their bonds. The same is applying for climate change related bonds, and the same is the same is valid for SDG related bonds issued by different institutions, including private sector institutions in the market. This is the type of solutions that we development banks should do. That's the way we should be in the market. Another set of examples related to how the way we support SMEs and small firms. As you know, as I mentioned before, this is by and large the most important firms in terms of employment and number of firms in Latin America, but also in other regions. So helping those firms in the right way so that they can enter the market, stay in the market, and have access to finance and have access to non-financial solutions is also very critical. Just to conclude, there is a lot for development banks to do, but there is a lot more for the private sector to do. So our job is above all try to work with the private sector for them to enter the market and to help develop and the proper solutions. I stop here.
Thank you, Georgie. We have heard very interesting practices and ideas discussed in this panel, but we are heading to the end of the session, and in the interest of time, I'm going to close this session. We have received many questions in the chat, and due to time constraints, we encourage the audience to continue discussion in the chat. We will try to go back to you and collect this response to you. As key takeaways, it seems to me that's quite important that we consider not only setting the right regulatory framework, but also having the correct public procurement instruments to support these processes. In terms of the political will as a key driver to implement these solutions at the country level, and at the same time for the business models to be integrated and adapted according to the local needs. Another point that calls my attention is the learning processes. That's quite important in terms of not only for the governments to integrate innovation, but also for the entrepreneurs to understand the mindset and also to reduce the risks from both actors. In terms of financial mechanisms, the need of innovative financial mechanisms, particularly looking at the perspective of e-gov, but also identifying how these innovative mechanisms can in fact benefit the entrepreneurs and also the public sector. In terms of the idea of sharing risks is quite clear here, not only for the governments in terms of reducing the risk, but also for the entrepreneurs in terms of how these processes can be more integrated with the dynamics of the public and private sector at the same time. So I think that another important key message here relies on the fact that that we need to do impact management and measurement, not only for impact investors, but above all for solutions that are being developed by governments with enterprises, so that we can really understand what is the financial return, but also what is the social value that's being generated through these processes, and how we can be more transparent in terms of the results that are being achieved. So from my side, I'd like to thank you all for attending this session. I want to express our appreciation and gratitude on behalf of Business Call to Action for our panelists and for sharing their experiences with us today. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Luciana. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, and all the others.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.